to remember. Spirit of life, we come here today to remember what some are intent on making us forget. To remember a man who fought to end segregation. To remember a man who marched to counter prejudice and oppression. To remember a man who was filled with peace and hope. To remember a man with promise and a dream. To remember a man with a voice that rang out for justice and freedom. All these things we remember and honor in the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and a life well lived in service to all. May it be so. Good morning. I'm Karen Mazzato. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Huntington's virtual Sunday service. It's good to be together. We are streaming live from multiple locations, so please be patient with any technical mishaps you might see or hear. We're using Zoom's meeting format so we can all see each other. We're also streaming live on Facebook. A big hello to all who are joining us there. We'd like to extend a special welcome today to visitors who may be joining our virtual service for the first time, as well as any newcomers who are returning. If you're new to our congregation and want to speak with someone to learn more about us, please contact us by email at office@uufh.org. We'll put this information in the chat during the service as well. Know that whoever you are, whomever you love, and wherever you are in your life's journey, you are welcome here. We have a few brief announcements. Please save the date for our virtual Stewardship Sunday, January 31st at 10:30 a.m. right here. January is a time for celebration, reflection, change, and connection. Let's share some time together reviewing the events and changes of the past year, envision possible goals for the future, and celebrate friendships and the search for meaning in our lives. This year's pledge drive theme is Soul, Strengthening Our UU Lives. Members of the Board of Trustees will update us on the ongoing search for a minister, as well as the business and financial state of the fellowship. The Stewardship Committee and talented volunteer members will inform and entertain us on how we can find soul inside ourselves and express and strengthen it in our personal and fellowship lives. Please remember to Zoom in and join us Sunday, January 31st at 10:30 a.m. for a joyful celebration of the new year and our connections to one another, to our beloved spiritual home, and to the community beyond our walls. If you have any questions, please connect with our wonderful Stewardship Committee led by Jan Brenner, Sue McGovern, and Renee McGloin. We thank them for their amazing efforts always. The UUFH is looking for a new part-time office administrator who will serve as the primary point of contact for inquiries from our members in the community. This position supports our minister, our board, our lay leadership, coordinates office volunteers, grounds, building maintenance and security, as well as assists with Sunday worship and other service preparation. Fuller details are in this week's flash. If you know someone who might be interested, please have them email a cover letter and resume to office@uufh.org. In the subject line, include office administrator search. We're not accepting calls at this time, but I'll put this information in the chat as well. And next Sunday, January 23rd at 3 p.m., please join us for a special Zoom presentation of the 2019 documentary, Conscience Point. This originally aired on PBS. As one of America's wealthiest communities has developed around them in Southampton, New York, the indigenous Shinnecock Nation of Eastern Long Island fight to maintain both their time-honored traditions and their land. After the movie, Becky Jania, who plays a large role in the film, will answer any questions and help facilitate a discussion about white supremacy narrative that surrounds us. You can register in advance in this week's flash. This is an important presentation as it relates to our eighth principle. And now I invite you to settle into your bodies and quiet your minds as we breathe deeply together and settle into our time of worship. Please join me in saying our mission statement. The words will be on the screen. In religious community, we nurture our individual spirits through caring for one another and helping to heal the world. Please join me in singing our affirmation, Common Ground.
On different roads we travel here to meet as one on common ground, to seek the truth with open minds, with loving hearts and helping hands.
Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. It is now my great pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker. Veronique Bailey has over 2 decades of experience in various capacities in the educational system. She's the founder and CEO of See Exceptional Expectations and is currently a principal fellow. She received a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Psychology from Howard University and a Master of Science in Science Education and a Master of Science in Educational Leadership from Brooklyn College. Veronique has an active role in several community organizations and is the president of the NAACP Huntington branch. Her why is to inspire and empower community members to support generations of youth, like her son, Prince Zaire, by fostering equity, improving access, and being courageous about the actions we need to make to improve conditions for all. Welcome, Veronique.
Good morning. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. Moving forward. So recently, as recent as last month in December, I had the opportunity to travel to Memphis. My grandmother was originally born and raised in Memphis and moved to St. Louis when she was 16, but I had never visited there prior. And it was kismet as I was invited to speak today while I was there in Memphis. So it was just very powerful, which invoked not only the memories of Martin Luther King, but the work of the sanitation workers and other civil rights activists while there. What you see in front of you is the Reflection Park, which was built by the mayor in Memphis. And it's surrounded by, within 4-block radius of the I Am a Man Plaza, the Lorraine Motel where Martin Luther King Jr. passed, and also Beale Street and the church where Ida B. Wells worked on her journalism and fight against segregation and discriminatory practices within the country. This particular park was created to not only reflect on Dr. Martin Luther King and his work in Memphis, but his work as a civil rights activist in the movement itself. So you're encouraged to look at the pieces while here, look at images of him and see and reflect on his presence and the work he had done in the time and the work we need to continue to do to support the vision he had at this time. Forward. After visiting this Reflection Park and taking time to reflect on his work and why he was in Memphis, which was to support the sanitation workers who were at the time fighting against discriminatory practices, unsafe conditions, and the inequities in their pay. He went there to support their strike. They began their strike back in February. He went in March and then attended again and gave one of his more famous speeches on April 3rd, where he not only shared his concerns or shared in the concerns with the sanitation workers, but also assured them that he had been to the promised land, that he had saw, that we would overcome, and that we must continue this particular fight. April 3rd, he gave that speech. And he stood there and he prophesied about not being able to get to the promised land with us, but assuring us that we need to be optimistic because we will get there. He passed on the following day at 6:01 p.m. And while in this space at I Am Plaza, you can walk around and see these dates, see comments from sanitation workers, and the work that was done at the time. On April 8th, his wife, Coretta Scott King, a civil rights activist, and other civil rights activists worked together to do a memorial march through Memphis. And then on April 16th, an agreement was made with the sanitation workers and the companies so that they could get equitable wages. The union would be recognized, and people would able to say that I am a man, that I deserve equity, not only in pay, but conditions so that I work and live in a safe community. You may see I'm here wearing a Ain't I a Woman shirt, and may recall Sojourner Truth's message about women stepping up, having the opportunity to step up and share in their concern, and sharing their concerns that Black women, white women, all women deserve to be treated well and deserve their right to vote. Forward. As you walk down from I Am a Man Plaza, you will pass this beautiful work where there are sanitation workers, individuals in Memphis, all men and women alike, fighting for the rights of these workers to again have equity in pay, safe conditions, and decreasing discriminatory practices. As you walk from the I Am Man Plaza to where he stayed at the Lorraine Motel, you will pass this as you walk down. This is the Lorraine Motel. You see the wreath in the background. That is where he was shot. That is where he last stood. That is where he asked for his last song. He knew in that moment what he wanted to hear, what the work that he had done. And in this moment, he stated that he wanted to hear this song. And this is also the place where you have the National Civil Rights Museum. You can actually go into the hotel and see all of the different artifacts across the civil rights tenure up until today. There are events and models and arts and passion within the walls, within the videos, within the space. I encourage you to travel not only to Memphis to enjoy the sights and see Beale Street and listen to the amazing music, but to see and experience the civil rights movement, to experience Martin Luther King as he experienced it through this monumentous opportunity to serve others. And that is how he led his life. We reflect on, during this time, he was doing the Poor People's Campaign, and he continuously, to his last breath, fought for others. Thank you.
I invite us all to sing Spirit of Life. Following the song, we'll enter into a time of silence and then prayer. As you participate at home, remember that it's not about the perfection of silence, but the intention. Join with me now in singing.
Rise in the
Prayer for Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday by Reverend Kathleen Rollens. Spirit of justice, God who befriends those who stand upon the constant edges of decision, crucial and alone. We are grateful to be together this morning. We gather especially to remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but not only him, for there were thousands of unnamed women and men who put their bodies and lives on the line so that all may be free. And yet freedom comes at a cost. And we know that racism and homophobia, ageism and ableism, sexism and classism, all of these often unacknowledged realities prevent us from fully knowing one another, from creating the beloved community spoken of by prophets and ordinary persons alike. May the work of Dr. King continue to eradicate injustice wherever and whenever we encounter it. May we continue to speak out against injustice, to speak even if we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. May the spirit of Dr. King continue to flow through our daily living. May we have the courage of Dr. King as we continue to stand up for justice, reconciliation, and truth. Despite challenge and controversy, Dr. King went to the mountaintop. He saw the promised land, and he reassured us we will get there one day. May that be no paradisal dream, but a reality in our time. May it be so. Amen. At this time in our service, we lift up the names of those we want to hold in our hearts. Please type the names in the chat box and they will be read aloud. We remember Becky, Mary Monnier, Ruth Ann, Debbie and Jim, Alice, Jerry, Tom and Kevin, Caitlin, Ann Hanley, Meg, Genevieve, Laura, Dottie and Mark, for these names and others that are written, Jackie. For these names and others that are written on the tablets of our hearts, we hold them near. Our split plate for the month of January is Gender Equality New York. Gender Equality New York, better known as Jenny, is a nonprofit whose mission is to advocate for transgender, non-binary, and intersex New Yorkers. Jenny is committed to gaining equal rights and ending discrimination to achieve economic, educational, racial, and social equity in our communities. These goals are met by engaging in education and outreach to increase the general public's understanding of the gender expansion community and to decrease incidents of discrimination and violence. We hope you'll be as generous as possible. You can send a check to the office or donate through the website as seen on your screen. You can also donate through the Give Plus Church app if you have been. Please note that you're encouraged to download our new app, the Vanco Mobile, which will replace the Give Plus Church after January 31st. And it will be retired. So that's the Vanco Mobile app. You can download that for free from the App Store or Google Play. Once you've downloaded the new app, you can find us by searching for UU Fellowship of Huntington. If you have questions or need assistance with this new app, please email Gerard Never. Thank you.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
To Alabama Governor George Wallace, the continuation of segregation was a solemn promise. To Martin Luther King, it was a scourge he vowed to overcome. In the city of Birmingham, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, whose church and home had been bombed because of his activism, began a campaign to integrate the downtown shopping district. King joined him in March of 1963. They both expected an extreme response from Public Safety Commissioner, segregationist Eugene Bull Connor.
One of the good fortunes of the civil rights movements were its enemies. Where could you find a better enemy than Bull Connor of Birmingham?
King submitted to arrest on April 12th, Good Friday, to draw maximum press coverage. Attorney General Robert Kennedy had asked King to avoid confrontations with police, wanting to pursue civil rights gains through the courts, not the streets.
Dr. King said, "Mr. Attorney General, I can best serve this country and my people by focusing on the evils of segregation." He said it's a corruption of the society. It's a corruption of the soul.
Sitting in his jail cell in Birmingham, King wrote about that corruption. He responded to an open letter that appeared in the Birmingham News that same day. It was titled "A Call for Unity" and was signed by 8 white clergymen. Their appeal made reference to outside leadership, calling the protests unwise and untimely. King wrote in the margins of that newspaper, "I am in Birmingham because injustice is here." He went on, "Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known." The sentiments King expressed in the letter had already made an impact on students who had committed themselves to civil rights activism throughout the Deep South.
We were greatly influenced by Martin Luther King Jr. and the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. But we didn't like the tempo of change. We wanted to speed it up.
It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer.
On May 3rd, students re-energized the campaign. Some were in high school, others were even younger. The Birmingham campaign became known as the Children's Crusade.
It was easy for a black student like myself in the South to say, well, if they can do it in Little Rock, if they can do it in Montgomery, if they can stand up, we can stand up too.
Connor and the police represented.
When Bull Connor ordered the police to disperse the protesters with dogs, it was clear this was a real battle, a violent confrontation. Firemen were ordered to use the full force of their hoses on the demonstrators. The local newspapers supported Bull Connor's response, blaming the chaos on the demonstrators.
I really believe he thought somehow in some way that he would scare us. But he didn't understand the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. He didn't understand the spirit of the movement.
Television and newspaper reports captured the brutality in Birmingham and showed it to the whole nation. Outside the region, it was shocking. It was horrifying. It was unacceptable.
It brought the civil rights movement into people's homes, with many American families watching the 6 o'clock news in such a way that it simply just couldn't be ignored.
In just a week, the demonstrators' nonviolent response created a public outcry that Birmingham could not dismiss. On May 10th, symbols of segregation, like separate water fountains, became relics as city leaders signed the Birmingham Truce. In addition, a plan was agreed upon to desegregate lunch counters. This was the kind of meaningful negotiation Martin Luther King had called for in his letter. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see, with one of our distinguished jurists, that justice too long delayed is justice denied. These words had inspired citizens young and old to take direct action in the streets of Birmingham. The letter was soon published in newspapers and magazines, and its power was undeniable. King had gone to Birmingham to fight injustice. In the end, his most powerful weapon was the letter he wrote from the confines of a jail cell.
Thank you so much, Jim, for getting us back on track. I think it was really important to see that whole video to get the complete context of the speech. I'm going to read my excerpt from the beginning. It's a much longer speech. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, etc.? Isn't negotiation a better path? You're quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is a historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. As one of our distinguished jurists once said, justice too long delayed is justice denied. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Let me rush on to mention my other disappointment. I have been disappointed with the white church and its leadership. Of course, there are some notable exceptions. I am not unmindful of the fact that each of you has taken some significant stands on this issue. But despite these notable exceptions, I must honestly reiterate that I have been disappointed with the church. I do not say that as one of those negative critics who can always find something wrong with the church. I say it as a minister of the gospel who loves the church, who is nurtured in its bosom, who has been sustained by its spiritual blessings, and who will remain true to it for as long as the cord of life shall lengthen. I had the strange feeling when I was suddenly catapulted into the leadership of the bus protest in Montgomery several years ago that we would have the support of the white church. I felt that the white ministers, priests, and rabbis of the South would be some of our strongest allies. Instead, some few have been outright opponents, refusing to understand the freedom movement and misrepresenting its leaders. All too many others have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent behind the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. In spite of my shattered dreams of the past, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leadership of this community would see the justice of our cause and with deep moral concern serve as the channel through which our just grievances could get to the power structure. I had hoped that each of you would understand, but again, I have been disappointed. Never before have I written a letter this long, or should I say a book. I'm afraid that it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk, But what else is there to do when you are alone for days in the dull monotony of a narrow jail cell, other than write long letters, think strange thoughts, and pray long prayers? If I have said anything in this letter that is an understatement of the truth and is indicative of an unreasonable impatience, I beg you to forgive me. If I have said anything in this letter that is an overstatement of the truth and is indicative of my having patience that makes me patient with anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I first and foremost want to thank God, of course, for allowing me to be here to have the opportunity to share this message with you this morning. And I also want to thank the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Huntington, Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Huntington for this opportunity and allowing me to speak on such an important matter such as this, becoming the dream. When you look around our town in Huntington or our country, are you satisfied with what Dr. Martin Luther King's dream has been realized? Go ahead, you can answer. I know many of us joining may be silent and will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteous like a mighty stream. How do we become satisfied? How does the dream become realized? Today, we are going to look through our optimism And we're going to think about our action, and we will become the dream realized. Many observers would say that we now live in a post-racial society, that the freedom bell that has rung all across the United States, African Americans and other minorities can sit and eat alongside whites in restaurants and ride alongside whites on buses, trains, and planes. An unprecedented number of individuals have been able to realize this dream, that they're able to get college degrees and their children enjoy the benefits of being catapulted into the middle class and upper class homes. We elected Barack Hussein Obama as the first Black president of the United States. And now we can even brag that a woman from my alma mater, Howard University, was elected, Kamala Harris, as the first Black woman, Asian woman, and woman as vice president of the United States. However, this type of exceptional achievement is not the ultimate manifestation of Dr. King's dream, at least not the dream as I understand it. His was a dream of absolutes, of completion. It was not the dream of tokenism, but of freedom, justice, and equality in their fullest and most complete sense. More than 6 decades later, we have made some progress, but America still has far to go to achieve the equity and economic justice bestowed as an American birthright. We must make a new commitment to freedom, justice, and equality. And it will require 3 things. It will require us to re-educate, to recognize the modern tools of oppression, injustice, and inequality. Second, the resurrection of old alliances and building up new ones, working together because, again, our destinies are tied in one. And third, collaborative organization to lobby our government and push for change. Because many of our systematic injustices are just that, systematic due to the laws and practices that exist in our country. So are you becoming the dream? Genesis 37, verse 19 to 20 in the King James Version, and they say one to another, behold, the dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit, and he will say, some evil beast have devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. What have we allowed to become of his dreams, our dreams, the dreams of the ancestors that have fought alongside Martin Luther King Jr.? The dream. As we become the dream, we must become doers of the words that we read in the I Have a Dream speech. When we read the letters that Dr. King wrote from Birmingham jail, that like the one just read, and when we read other literature and hear stories and songs and books that have been written about him, his dream is deeply rooted in the American dream. He stated, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. He dreamed we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the contents of their character. Most people remember these thunderous and passionate lines from the speech. I have a dream that my 4 little children will live in this nation. And he has that dream for everyone to be judged by the content of their character. But in addition to that dream, his goals were to fix, beyond fixing the de jure segregation, he also fought to end wealth discrepancies between Blacks and whites. Delivered on August 28, 1963, the speech was King's address as part of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. But that freedom of holding hands and sitting side by side and being in a space of peace is more than just appreciating everyone and not judging their character, but making sure that they have the ability to live the American dream. Because how dare I sit next to my neighbor who is hungry whose bowels and tummies roar, thirsty and hungry for not only the freedom of and the right to feed their families, but to be free to live a prosperous life here in America. In addition to this goal, he fought for economic equity. The original intent behind Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech was an appeal to end economic and employment inequalities. He summoned all of his listeners to think anew about the heritage and the promise of America. He shared in the beginning of his speech about righting the wrongs of the economic inequalities suffered by African Americans since emancipation. In a sense, he said, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of Republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note, a note for all of us, to which every American was to full heir. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there is insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. And so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice, not for some of us, but for all of us. So his dream was to honor its promises. And when we say it's America, who is America? We are America. Each of us individually and all of us collectively, we owe on this note. He implored his fellow protesters and all of his fellow citizens to understand that their destinies as Americans were indissolubly bound together. We all will thrive together, or we all will fail together. Dr. King's dream is a call for an action, not merely activity, not merely going to this protest and doing this thing, but a continuous action until we reach a place where freedom for all exists. This is the essential duality of the call to accept the fierce urgency of now, that we must act with all due alacrity, yet also with the thoughtfulness and seriousness of purpose appropriate to the meaningful action. We should be holding ourselves uncompromisingly accountable for making progress now. We must become impatient optimists. At the same time that we are impatient optimists, we should not be complacent optimists. We cannot rest on those that have degrees, or some of us in our community that have access to health or quality education. We cannot be complacent that some of us have received the promise of America. We should avoid congratulating ourselves for doing no more than securing a promissory note for some. At all costs, we have to avoid the smug self-satisfaction that doing good works is good enough. That if we just stay the course with a possible solution, eventually a miracle will happen and all people, especially the most disadvantaged, will be well served. When reforms fail to improve the lives for the disadvantaged, we have to pursue a relentless commitment to understanding why it failed and to learning to improve outcomes based on this understanding. Dr. King's duality reminds us that we have to live on both sides of a line. We must demand results now, but we also must demand that our actions be robust and that they excel in all contexts for all people. I am reminded of the words of Langston Hughes, who asked us, what happens to a dream deferred? While his poem was written prior to King's speech, it resonates today, forcing us to ask, as King did, what can we do today to avoid further pain, division, and fear in the future? So I list some things that we can do as a community, some actions we can take. Politically, each of us, on Martin Luther King Day, I'm reminded of his prophetic message, how astutely he diagnosed the problems of the United States, and sadly, the degree to which we are still wrestling with the same problems. But his day is not a day just to remember his legacy, but it's a day to act upon his bold vision and to save the soul of America. We have to be politically committed. This commitment to action is even more imperative this year in the face of a mounting assault on voting rights and the crisis facing our democracy. Most critically, we cannot honor King's vision by working to restore the voting rights that he knew were so central to dismantling racism in this country. As King proclaimed, voting is the foundation stone for political action. Two bills that will restore these protections, which have now been combined into another bill and will be voted on the House, is the Freedom Act to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. King himself spoke out against the filibuster and the way it was so often used to block civil rights legislation. King lived in an era where the filibuster was routinely used to deny Black equality. NAACP leaders at the time fumed that the filibusters were the legislative equivalent of a lynching. A slew of states across the country are feverishly passing laws to crush the increased numbers of voters who live in urban areas as well as for individuals of color, under the guise of making elections more secure. Legislators are engaging in tactics such as gerrymandering, decreasing polling locations, criminalizing the distribution of water and snacks to voters, waiting in long lines, and restricting mail-in ballots. Without federal legislation to restore consistent and just voting laws, our democracy and his dream remains in peril. King offers voting rights advocates today a model for explaining why voter suppression laws betray democracy in his speech titled, "Give Us the Ballot and We Will Transform the South." He stated, "So long as I do not firmly and irrevocably possess the right to vote, I do not possess myself. I cannot make up my mind. It is made up for me. I cannot live as a democratic citizen, observing the laws I have helped to enact. I can only submit to the edict of others. Politically, we must be also bold enough to hold political leaders in our community and across the nation accountable by participating and serving on boards, commissions, authorities, and advisory committees. We must urge our government leaders to remove barriers that prevent an increasing involvement on those board commissions and committees by Black citizens." MLK, when we think about holding hands and coming together, he shared people fail to get along because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other, because they have not communicated with each other. Almost 60 years later, that table of brotherhood is still waiting for more diners to pull up a seat. The country's public schools, neighborhoods, and communities of worship remain largely racially segregated, right here in our own town of Huntington. When was the last time you heard any political or civil rights leader talk with passion about racial integration? The reasons for this are complex, but it boils down to this. There are never enough white Americans, including progressive white people, who are willing to embrace integration when it comes to accepting non-white people in their backyards. Our beloved community must commit to making progress, to fully honoring Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy by internalizing the importance of diversity. Who do we have in our homes? Who do we have in our churches? Who do we have sit at our tables? We must be all inclusive. We must create a community where we all come to the table and value the unique experiences, qualities, and characteristics each individual possesses. The creation of a culture that strives for equity and embraces and respects the values of differences through supporting each other, reaching out to each other, educating yourself, remaining optimistic, and being an ally and an advocate. When you think about stepping forward in policies, also step on the boards of our schools. Go to your school board meetings and hold the schools accountable to eliminating the gap. King believed that the quality education should not be merely a means to a career, but also to an improved society. Despite the best efforts of many educators, too many of our schools produce outcomes as unequal in 2022, in 2021-2022 school year as they were in 1961. White-Black achievement gaps of most of our schools and our dropout and discipline statistics are still too closely correlated with race, ethnicity, and poverty. through seemingly colorblind policies and practices in our schools, we privilege some children and neglect or punish others. We have to be reflective on our actions and make sure that we are spreading the truth, destroying the false discourses of fairness in our criminal justice system, where we make assumptions about others based on their appearance rather than their actions. We have to step up. So I encourage you to focus on understanding others. What different roles and identities make up a single person? How does that shape the process and the messages that you share with others? At any instance of injustice, we cannot hesitate to speak up. We must take efforts in extending this message to our friends, family, and other relations. As King stated, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. When someone is in your midst and is spewing statements of hatred or working out systems of injustice or systems that keep marginalized groups from their freedom of the American dream, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about those things that matter. In closing, tomorrow we celebrate MLK Day. It is a day on, not a day off. It's a day on for volunteerism, a day on for bridge building and the pursuit of solutions that move our nation closer to the King's dream of our beloved community. I need you to become the dream. Let's have a dream in which we honor King's life and sacrifice by respecting his vision in our everyday lives. Let us finally bring this great man's vision to life with the fierce urgency of now together, because the destiny of others is tied up with ours. We cannot walk alone. We must walk and walk together. We must fight for right over might. And so today, let us get back to our communities as members of the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Dissatisfaction. Go back knowing that this situation can and will be changed by our individual and collective actions. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair or simply be onlookers waiting for the dream to happen to us, for we are the dream. So please become the dream.
Thank you, Veronique, for that important, passionate, powerful message. I know it touched us all. As we extinguish the chalice today, we shall overcome. When we can truly celebrate the diversity of contributions and talents offered by all people, we shall overcome hatred and prejudice and oppression. When we can truly extend our hands to one another in loving acceptance, we shall overcome the past that haunts us now. Living in freedom and peace, we shall overcome the wrongs that have happened and the debts left unpaid. Let us join together in that commitment to overcome. Let us say together, Amen.
Precious Lord.